process. Conceptually, it'll be the same, but I'll give you guys this file too. Let me save this. Let's look at some of the, we're trying to set them up so it's the same kind of thing, controlled the same way, but in 3D rather than 2D. And so some of the stuff we're going to do here, we're learning some of the basic rigging ideas that work, the idea of parenting, that the child moves with the parent, that stays put, right? Except over here, instead of those drop-down menus, it's all in the hierarchy over here in Cinema 4D. Everybody understands that part, right? Okay. Then the other tags I would write down that become really important in Cinema 4D for rigging are the target tag, right? The target tag allows one thing to point at another thing. And so we're going to use that for the eyeball, right? We can get an eyeball target. And now if I move that, the eyeball moves, right? Because it's always pointing at the target rather than having to go in there and rotate the eyeball. This usually is a little bit better of a workflow, right? And so the target tag, right? You could use it for an eyeball, or say you had some sort of like gun turret needed to put in at something, right? This could be another use for the target tag. So the target tag is really good. And then what we've been sort of glossing over up until now, the other thing we're going to use is this tag right here. And this purple one right here. This is the IK chain, okay? IK chain tag. And so every time there's two ways to build a limb. What's called IK or FK. And so let's get just a cube. There we go. And I'll do this and this. And if I want to change the anchor point for a primitive object, remember I have to hit C. And now I can change the anchor point for it. Right, I'll move it over there. And so I'll just do that. And then get out of anchor point mode. And I'm just going to make a really quick limb here. Like that. And like that. There we go. So this is those three things. Right, so up here, I have these three limbs. And I'm going to set them up as a FK rig. Okay, FK rig is what we've been doing up until this point. Anytime you just use parenting to set up a character, that is FK for forward kinematics, right? Hold on, let me see if I can do this with my thing. I do this and this and let's see. There we go. Look at that. There you go. Forward kinematics. Is my head in the way? Is that the right way? I can't see my screen. Am I going the right way? Wait, is the text backwards for you guys? Okay. Yeah, forward kinematics, right? Kinematics. And so I'm just going to take this series of cubes and make this the parent cube, second cube, this cube. There we go. And so now if I select all the cubes and hit R, I have a forward kinematics rig. I can essentially move things around here by just rotating down the chain. Does that make sense? And so in this kind of setup, motion comes from the source. Let's say this is the shoulder up here, down the chain to the hand or the foot or the end of the limb. Forward kinematics. Everybody with me there? All right, that one's easy to set up. There's no forward kinematics tag because it's just, you just set up the hierarchy. Everybody with me? Okay, so the, not necessarily opposite, but the, here we go. Smug Dragon Boy, I'm going to have to guess that's Damien. Is that right? Yeah, there we go. How's it going, Damien? Okay, so we got this one. That is FK. I'll make this one as a example too, right? So we have FK up there. And now I'm going to go ahead and take this group of, let's go ahead and, how do I copy drag in Cinema? If I want to copy I want to copy all of this stuff. Control or Command if you're on Mac. Okay, so now I've got this second setup here. Let me add some text actually. Shift-C, Mo, text, Mo problems. There we go. And so this over here is forward kinematics. There we go. Boom. And then over here, the opposite of side of this thing is what's referred to as inverse kinematics. Okay, and so inverse kinematics requires a tag because see how this works. Also, the order matters here. So I'm going to fold up the FK, and in the IK here, I'm going to select from the root to the end of the limb. Okay, and I'm using three things as an example here, but it could be 100 things. It doesn't matter, right? It's your limb could have as many joints as you wish. So from the root to the end here, and I'll Shift-C and type IK chain, right? IK short for inverse kinematics, and there it is, the command for create IK chain. And so if I just press enter on that, there we go. It puts the tag. It does two things. It puts a tag on the top of the root or the whole series. Notice that they still need to be parented to each other like this, right? That still needs to be there. So the first step would be parent. The second step would be create the tag, and it makes the tag, and it makes this. It makes an extra null, and it calls it cube goal, right? And so the goal here is the important part. And so if I select this goal here and move this, let's see. Now you see that I'm able to move this, and this, the shoulder stays put, or the hip, or whatever, and everything else moves based on this, right? And so this would be an IK chain. Let's move the letters got mixed up here. It's this and that. There we go. And so this one up here creates that, and this one down here is just the rotating everything one at a time. All right, and so the IK thing seems they both have their place. All right, they're two different techniques. It's not that one is different, better than the other. Sometimes it makes more sense to do one and more sense to do the other, right? IK is most useful in the idea of like keeping feet on the floor while the body moves around, right? In that we can separate the goal from the body. But those are the two main ideas we need to keep in mind here, right? And then the other technique is the target tag, because everything else is built on that between all of these parameters here. Making sense so far? Okay, cool. So forward kinematic, reverse kinematic. Let me save this as an example. FK, okay, there we go. All right, and if we go back to eyeball guy, where is it? Here we go, 3D eyeball monster. The other thing with rigging is you want to set stuff up, and in order to get all these complex body interactions, it requires a lot of parts, right? And we ran into this with After Effects. After Effects, it ends up just being a huge dump of layers, right? And so the body, let's change that to body. There we go. The body has all this stuff underneath it. And when you're doing, animating these characters, you really just want to be dealing with the stuff that matters, the controls, right? And so especially in, we did that a little bit in we just hid some layers in After Effects, right? Just sort of like, okay, we're not going to need this, just hide those layers, or use Shy Guy to shy those layers, and then just focus on the controls. And one way of primarily making controls, you see all my controls here are these are all nulls, right? And so here, if I click on any of these targets, these are just nulls, but I can see them in the viewport, because any null, when you create a new null in Cinema 4D, by default, you don't see it at all. It's just an invisible point, you know? But if you come over here to the object menu, there's the shape, and you can choose whatever shape you want for a null. And so, for instance, I'll pick circle, and now I get a circle. And the other interesting thing is that the default is that the circle stays flat to the camera, so that as I move the camera around, you see how the circle stays, you know, I'm not able to go around it. And that actually isn't what we want for a lot of this. So I would go like circle, and then change the orientation here to one of the planes so that I can tell where it is in 3D space. And so if I want it flat to the floor, that's Y. And so now that is right there. Again, you're not going to see this if you render. It's just a null. But we're going to use these to create controls so that it's easy to grab and move parts of the thing. All right, so you can do that with any null. You can make any null visible in that way with any of these number of shapes here. Does that part make sense so far? Cool. All right, so now let's look at some of the parts here. We'll make one limb together, and then we'll go from there, because all the limbs are constructed the same way. But here's what I ended up with. I got the body controller, right? And so if I move the body over here, oops, I didn't parent the body. Let's put the body under here. There's the body controller. All right, and so if the body moves, everything comes along. I've got the eye target, right? And so here allows me to make the eyeball look at stuff. I've got the, and then I've got goals for each limb, leg, and arm, so on and so forth. And so that's what I ended up with here. And so I've got body, eye target, left leg, left arm, right arm, right? And so these are the controls. These are the things I would actually animate. I wouldn't want to animate any of the stuff down here that actually comprises the body in order to just keep things cleaner, right? These are all the controls, and this is the part that gets animated. The controls, right? If you think about basic marionette puppetry, and you know, I haven't done any marionette puppetry, right? But you know, you have the controls, and then you have the character, right? And so we're separating this in the same way, in that you got the controls, and then you got the character. They're linked, but they're separate. Cool? Okay, so let's build an arm here. I'll go ahead and turn one arm off so we can see here, because there's a few issues, right? So as far as building the body, right, the body's primarily composed of a sphere, right? That's not news to anybody at this point. And then how do I make the eyeball? What do you guys think? If you had to guess. Yeah, it's actually two spheres, right? And so I've got I had one sphere. Let's put this one over here. In order to make these more round, I came in here and turned up the segments, you know, to something reasonable, right? And so for the eyeball, you have that, and then you can control drag a second one, and T, bring it down, and move it out till it's just outside there, right? And then I could put the white on this part and the black on that part. And there I have, as long as I make the pupil a child of the eyeball, Now I have that, right? And if to use the target tag on this eyeball, this giant eyeball, even bigger than the other giant eyeball, I could Shift C target and get the target tag. Be careful here. There's a bunch of target stuff. So you don't want the MoGraph one. You don't want retarget or target light or target camera. You want this one right here. The animation target tag. It just looks like one big target. Okay. And so that's the one I put on here. Shift C target. That one. Right. And the only thing a target tag needs is what do I point at? And so I could, for instance, just drag my eye target down there. And now, okay, yeah, so that it faces backwards. And so I could just, fix that by making sure that the eyeball is on the right, the pupil's on the correct side of that, right? And so it'll be positive Z will be what it will face towards by default. And so now if I move my eye target around, they both look at the target tag. Does that make sense there, how the target tag works, right? Essentially, you just put it on something that you want to point at something else, and then you provide the something else for it to look at. So that's making the eyeball, and then the eyeball itself is a child of the body, right? The big sphere, that's the bode right here. That's the whole big thing. Make sense? All right, target tag. Now, making a limb, let's look at that. These limbs, if you look over here, these are just sweep shapes. And so just for review real quick, right? If I make any sort of shape with my spline tool, I'll just take the pen tool here and make some sort of squiggly line. There we go. And then I provide some other, let's use this circle, make it smaller. I can sweep the circle along the line with the sweep, right? So I'll take this sweep and put it in there like this, and I'll sweep the circle along the sphere, and now I get, a basic tube. Remember, NB is the shortcut to see all of the polygons. Everybody with me there? Now, the other thing is that we're going to be using splines in this one, and the important thing to realize is that by default, splines have uneven distribution of geometry. See that? See how there's more geometry on the curve than on the straight part? Okay. It does that so that the curves look good, but the straights are fine, and it uses the least amount of geometry possible. That's okay, but in our case, I think we're going to want to adjust that. And so you don't adjust that in the sweep. It has to do, this geometry in the sweep has to do with the underlying geometry of the spline. And so you need to select the spline and come in here and under intermediate points, and that's in the object menu. Occasionally it's better to have this equally distributed. And so you can come over here into uniform. And now we have an equal distribution of points. This, it doesn't look better right now for this static spline, but for something that's going to be moving around and deforming, it's going to make a little bit more sense to make sure it's an equal distribution of points. And so making sure that goes to uniform, right? So a quick review of the sweep object. Is that jogging everyone's memory? Cool. All right. And so that's how we're going to make the limbs. The other thing about the sweep is that we can control, if you go to the object and you fold out under details, there is a thing where you can scale it over the length of the spline, right? And so this allows us to, if you wanted to create like biceps or something, you could do something like that, to sort of make it thicker in that one part. And then the other part that's important is rounding the ends, and that's going to be under the caps. Okay, and the caps menu is better in the new version of Cinema 4D. You just come over here to round, and you dial this up, and you get rounded caps, which is simpler than what that used to be. You used to have to check a few things, but you can control how rounded the caps are on the end to create the rounded caps for the sweep. Make sense so far? Okay, and so that's how we're going to make the arm. Let's do that. I'm going to come in here to, back to here. There we go. And let's go ahead and remove. I'll turn off one of the arms. Let's say this one. There we go. Okay, and so we want to have control. One way to do this, right, would just be come in here and draw the arm. There you go. I've got a spline to hang the arm off of, right? Nothing necessarily wrong with that, but if you start thinking forward in the process, I'm going to want to control the end of the arm separately than the top of the arm. And right now, all those points are in here underneath the spline, right? And in order to access them, I need to come in and go into point mode and then grab one of the points. And I can move it individually, but that's not going to be very sustainable, right? In that every time I want to animate the arm, I need to drill down to the spline points. So a different way to do it is to use some nulls. And so I'm going to get a null here, and I'll move this up to like where the shoulder should be, right there. And then I'll just control drag another null to where I want the elbow to be, and control drag another null to where the hand should be, right? And we'll call this shoulder, elbow, and then here, this will be hand. And I am recording all of this. This will all go up. And then there's a really great object that'll connect things, and that is the tracer object. The tracer object is two things. It either like traces the movement of an object as a spline, or it connects objects with splines. And so if you shift C tracer, the only weird thing about the tracer is that some of the procedural objects, some of them, it's important to build the hierarchy, right? The splines need to be a child of this object in order to work. But the tracer object has its own trace link here. And that's where you dump things in that it should trace. It may seem like kind of a pain in the butt that like, why is that different than the other objects? But it does make sense the further you go along with things, because occasionally you may need objects that aren't part of the hierarchy. They're outside of the hierarchy to do stuff. And so here, I'm going to drag down the elbow, hand, and shoulder I put together. And then by default is in trace path mode. I need to change it to connect objects mode. And there, now we have a spline, right? The tracer is the spline. We have a spline that will form an arm, but I have individual control over the shoulder in the hierarchy, and the elbow, and the hand, or end of the arm, right? They're separate objects that I can easily grab, easily make controls for, so on and so forth. Everybody with me there? See how that's better than just sort of drawing a line, right? As far as like the control of it later. Okay, and so now the tracer is a spline. And so if I make a sweep, let's get a circle spline to sweep along. So I'll get a circle here, and I'll make it smaller, like 10. And then I'll get a sweep over here. And I'll dump the circle and the tracer into the sweep. And you see that it traces. It functions just like a spline. But all of these points are still live because the tracer is programmatically generating the spline from those nulls. Does that make sense? Now, the other thing with the tracer, what's the problem here with this arm? It doesn't have enough what? Yeah, and in order to have more curvature, it needs to have more subdivisions. Yeah. And so remember, it's not dependent on the sweep. It's dependent on the spline. And so if you go to the tracer has a menu down here. And by default, it's in linear mode for the spline, meaning that it just draws straight lines between the points. And so let's put it into B spline and say uniform points. And so now I get nice smoothing between all of those points. And I can come into the sweep and do all the stuff I was doing before with this. You know, if I want to make the top of it, the other one, a little bit thinner, and the bottom, and grab the sweep and come in here to the caps, round the cap out a little bit, maybe give it a couple more subdivisions. There we go. And throw my red material on that. There we go. And so now I've got all three of those limbs made, or all three of the parts of the limb, right? Right there. And so let's put them in the hierarchy. Put the elbow underneath the shoulder and the hand underneath the elbow. There we go. And so again, the controls here end up being more important than this is just sort of, if I select the sweep and I start moving that around, you see it doesn't even really do anything, right? Because all the geometry is being sort of controlled by the other things at this point. Cool. And if I wanted to make another arm or another limb, I could just take both of those things and control drag them. And I don't need to, actually, some things it's not good to control drag. You just want to copy paste and then move. And now I have a separate limb. And I could, turn this one into the other arm. And I could copy paste that again. And now I could turn this one into the leg. So once you get the first one all set up, then you're good to go. Does that make sense how I did this? So step 1, create nulls for the shoulder, elbow, hand. Step 2, use the tracer to connect those nulls. Step 3, sweep the tracer in order to create the limb. Cool? All right. And then in order to get the maximum control over this, we are going to want to create an IK chain. So again, from the shoulder to the hand, I'll select. Let's make sure I have these nulls labeled correctly. Is that the hand? I think so. Hold on. I turned something off. That's on. That's on. Here. Oh, that's one of the ones I copied. Here we go. Yeah. Here's the hand. Yeah, that's good. Okay. So from the shoulder to the hand, Shift-C, IK chain, create the IK chain, and it gives me the goal up there. And so now I'm able to do this. And it's also super fun in the IK chain. There's a bunch of stuff here that we don't need to worry about right now. This, these chains can be super complicated and you can use dynamics and a bunch of other stuff. But under tag, there is a stretch, which is set to 0. And if you turn that up, now if I move the goal, I get Mr. Fantastic arms. Because by default, that's at 0. And if you move the goal, it becomes like a target tag. It points at it, but it will only stretch so far. Make sense? Okay, so everybody got the basics here of how to make a limb this way. Now, let's come back down to the whole monster and look at the hierarchy I've got set up here. So the hierarchy, you're going to want all of the body parts underneath the body null. And so I've got a null that's at the same position as the sphere, the main sphere, and all the stuff is under there. So the eyeball, all of the actual geometry is in there. And you can see, it's the chain of nulls and then the geometry and the tags, all of that is underneath the body. And then this is the body controller. And what did I not put under the body? The targets, okay? And the goals. Because those, you don't want them to be a child of the body, because then if it was, then when it turned, the target would turn with it. And we want to be able to do this so that the body can move, right? You could put the eye target underneath the body. It would depend on, maybe the scene, right? Because now if I move the body, if I rotate the body, he's still trying to look at the target, right? And so that kind of gets weird, if I push it really far. But I could put the eye target underneath the body so that he, keeps looking at the target. Even if I rotate this, then the target comes with it, right? But then I could still animate the target, relative to the body. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It would depend on what kind of motion you're doing. Now, let's come back here. I think I undid when I undid this. Okay, the other part, and so here's the, I'm going to take the target out of there. There's the, so I'll post all this and also give you this file. So the body and this is all on the same level underneath a null up here, which is just sort of a general, anytime you have a character, it's good to have them, this null isn't used for animating, it's just sort of like used for placing, right? If I need to get all of the character to like over to something else in the scene, it's an easy way to do it without having to like move all of the targets and then, something could go wrong there. So just having it encapsulated in one target, one, root, usually at the feet, makes most sense for targets, for characters like this. Yeah, so there we go. I've got all of those different parts there. Now, the other big thing I would definitely write down is that when you're rigging stuff like this, you're creating all these complex hierarchies. Before you start doing any animating, you want to set a default position, right? So that when things go wrong, because it's not if they're going to go wrong, it's when it's going to go wrong, that you're able to get back to just what is referred to as a T pose, just some sort of neutral pose. You really want to be able to get back there with just one click, right? Where you're like, oh man, this is not good. I need to get back to just neutral. And so how do you do that? We do that by freezing transforms. What does freezing a transform mean? It means it kind of saves the default transform positions and then makes this their 0, 0, 0 position, so that when you reset them, they come back to this position, right? Because right now, if I just as an example, if I took this arm and I came in here and just set it at 0, 0, 0, now, like, his arm is pointing at this target that's on the floor, right? This is actually ended up being pretty awkward. But we don't want it to do that. When I zero it out, Miro's I know you guys, are you watching all the call? Because Miro's laughing at all my jokes, whereas the rest of you guys kind of not so much, right? So, yeah. Okay, well, that was pretty delayed. Yeah. Yeah, I would appreciate it if you could do both, help me feel funnier and also do a good joke. They're good jokes. If you that's part of your thing, like if you want to be a funnier person, I would be a good person to learn from. Yeah. Right, Godzilla? What was I doing? Okay, yeah. Okay, so we got to freeze the transform. So this is critical. Before I start doing anything else, I want to select all my controls here and come over to coordinates over here and freeze. Watch what happens when I hit freeze over here. Right now, because I have multiple things selected, it has a whole bunch of coordinates, and then down here there's 0. If I hit freeze, it moves all of the information about where they are down to this frozen transform. And then up here, this is 0. Okay? And so the ground truth of my character is now this position, right? So if I come in here and I, really make some mistakes as far as, let's take this and, oh no, how do I get back? because eventually Control Z is gonna be a problem, right? We won't be able to Control Z enough. And so now Shift C, reset, and there is reset PSR is a button, right? So anytime you do the Shift C menu here, you can take those buttons and you can drag them, Shift C, reset, PSR for position, scale, rotation. And I can drag that button up into my interface, which just re-zeros things. So now I can select my whole character, I can say reset PSR, and boom, I'm back to ground truth, right? Now, if I didn't freeze before I hit reset PSR, the character would collapse into a singularity around 0, 0, 0, right? It would just be smushed. All the hands and legs would all get crumpled together. And, it's a horrible thing to do to your character. And so you got to once you get everything set up, you select it all and you got to freeze so that then as things are going wrong, you can just hit reset PSR and everything goes back to good, to your ground truth character position. Make sense? That's a critical one. Don't skip that step. Once you get everything rigged correctly, freeze all the stuff and then go from there. And now you've got this button up here that, if things get weird, you can just come up here and get it back. So keys to victory, making sure. Okay, so, well, the other, you want to reset before you start animating. So that, this reset just resets the current position of the things. And so once I start making keyframes here, then the keyframes will override. But you want the keyframes to be relative. You want them to be relative to these positions. And so you want to freeze before you start animating, right? So now if I just want like super simple idle animation, which will be, what we want to make for this week, right? I'll just grab the body here. And let's make sure we're in object mode. There we go. And I'll just set some quick keyframes here. Let's say I'm going to move them down just a little bit here. Y, and then up a little bit. This keyframe, back down. Keyframe up a little bit, right? I would recommend not using this while we're doing this, to sort of only set the keyframes that you need. There's going to be a lot of keyframes here as it is, and we want to create just a simple loop of an idle animation here, right? And so we want to make sure anytime we're doing a looped thing, we want to make sure that the first keyframe is the same as the last keyframe. And I usually do that by just straight up copying, Control C, and then pasting the first keyframe at the end over here, or just control dragging it to the end so that I'm sure it will loop. There we go. That's all too slow. And so let's go ahead and grab all the keyframes. I'm going to go into animate mode. There we go. I'm going to grab all of this. And this is so much easier in Cinema. Just smush it all this way. Let's say it's about 2 seconds here. Let's fix our project. So I'm going to go to, what was it, Shift D, project settings. Let's make sure we're at 24 FPS. And let's make our project just 48 frames. So 2 seconds. And now I'll come back to this view over here. And so let's put that in there to actually get the project the right project time. Max time 48. 48. There we go. All right. So all of that's correct. Cool. There you go. Maybe space these out a little bit. Yes. After you have to select it all and then Alt click the last keyframe. Yeah, I wish the C4D interface is definitely better in that regard with it just shows you the handles and you can just drag it around up here and compress it that way. But here in After Effects, it's Alt and then drag, does it? Or Option for Mac. So now in regards to the keyframes, now if I hit the reset, if I select my stuff, Shift C, reset, PSR, it goes back to the default position. But when I hit play, it starts reading the keyframes, right? And so that reset PSR gets you back to where you are. But once you start making keyframes, the keyframes are king. Like it'll read the keyframes from there. And so now if you don't like this, you just got to delete the keyframes and do it again, right? As far as like changing where it is or selecting a position and setting a different keyframe or whatever at that point. But you can select the keyframes here. And so now it can select some keyframes for looking around. So the eye target here, this case, maybe I'll use this button just to sort of keep it where it is. Same thing with the eyeball though. Let's go ahead and set a keyframe there. And then here we'll have them look up real quick. So I'll set a keyframe and then just one or two later, look up, keyframe, stay there, right? Remember the eyeball movements have to be quick, and then we'll have it hold and then look down. And make sure it's got to look the same place. So let's go ahead and control drag that first one right there to over here. And so there we go. Right. And we get some nice stuff for free here in that the body's moving, but so I guess in this case, I like the eye target outside of the body, right? And because we get the eyeball sort of trained on something that's there, even though the body's moving up and down, right? And so you get some better movement there for free. And so if you wanted to have him pick up his feet, here, let's say right about here, we'll take the right leg goal and I'll go ahead and keyframe there and then just a little bit forward, have him there, keyframe, and then just a little bit more, just control drag this one. Right, so always control dragging that first one. And so here, let's see, did I grab the right thing? I may not have moved the right thing. Let's see here. I'm going to just get rid of these. So I'll select them all, right click, animation, delete track. There we go. Let's reset once, everything. There we go. All right. So right here, we got right leg goal. Is our right leg goal working? Yeah, right leg goal is working. Okay, good. And so let's get all the keyframes there. There we go. Keyframe. And then grab this one, control drag over to here. There we go. And so we got one foot coming up and down. And we could do the same thing with the other foot. And get his arm swinging a little bit. But we just want something that'll loop over and over again, right? And so that if we come back to this, it could be its own thing. But the big part of it will be, construct him. So, I mean, conceptually, it's the same as what we did in After Effects, right? The execution is maybe slightly more complicated, but as long as you get these core ideas down, right? Because every character that you set up to do stuff presents its own challenges as far as like the rig that makes sense for that character. And so understanding the underlying principles makes it much better than sort of like, let's rig this character, that character, step by step. If you get this IK, FK idea down in some of these basic ideas, it makes it easier to put these together. Make sense? And then Yeah, let's go ahead and, I mean, I'll have you guys, we'll turn in the C4D file plus a render. And so in this case, if you render it, yeah, there we go. If we want them to look shinier, let's go ahead and make another. Okay, well, the two things about the textures. One, when we create a new texture, come in here to, or new material rather, for the time being, we're going to keep using PBR materials. Okay, PBR, physically based rendering. And so if you just double click, it makes a standard material, and you want to make a PBR material. Okay, PBR material is going to allow us to do some things more easily. And so the thing when you make a PBR material, if I double click on it, you notice that everything is unchecked except for reflectance. Okay, this is kind of a transitionary technology right now. And so under reflectance, everything is in the reflectance channel. There's all these sub-channels up here that are layers. And so the two things that you need to worry about right now are reflection and diffuse. And the word I would write down in my notes is diffuse is the base color, right? And so if I want to change the color, I come in here to the diffuse and I turn it into, some other color. And then under reflection, I can select a different, basically if I turn down the roughness, I can make it nice and shiny, right? That would be the thing I would do right now without getting into this too much. And now I could, throw that on the floor. There we get some of that. And if I want to render this, the advantage of using these PBR materials is you see that they look pretty good in the viewport. And so I could just make a really quick render of just the viewport by switching from standard to viewport. And so viewport will just render what is in the viewport. And if you select viewport here, there's this really awesome button right now under filter that will turn off all the junk in the view to just see the geometry. And so if I press that geometry only, and then I render this output, I don't need to save it. I just want to see all the frames, and render it. Yes. All right, why did it not turn off the geometry? Yes, viewport, geometry only. Let's say NA. Now if I render, yes. There we go. All right, so I had to turn off the lines, which is the NA and B key. And yeah, I have a light here with shadows, and shadows will show up, but the material was too shiny. If it's super shiny, you won't get shadowing. And so in this one, let's go ahead and turn down this reflection strength on the green one, the floor material. And now if I render this, I should get some shadow on the ground. Let's see. Yeah, it's faint. Anyways, this is the preview. If you hit Control R, it still shows you the final render stuff. But I'm digging the viewport stuff more and more because A, it will render out faster later, and B, we'll get to, don't worry about the rendering too much this week. There's enough to chew, with just the setting up the character and everything. We'll get into some more rendering stuff because there's also, we're going to use that Redshift renderer this semester. So that'll also do stuff on the graphics card, which will be fun. Let me save this now. File, save, incremental. Make sure you got your autosave turned on for Cinema 4D as well as After Effects. So in Cinema 4D, it is, in After Effects, in the preferences, it just says autosave. Up here, I think it's under Files. Yeah, Files, autosave, right? Make sure that's on so you're not going to get hosed by Cinema 4D crashing. Cool. So a little bit heavier workload this week. We're doing the 3D, the 2.5D camera stuff, which really won't take too long. And then setting up this guy. Sound good? Look cool? Fun? Yeah? Cool. Let me